China's military capabilities are increasing. Chinese amphibious invasion of Taiwan will be the most complex military operation we've ever seen in history, more complex than the Normandy invasion.
Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today we are asking a question keeping diplomats, military experts, and policymakers all over the world up at night. Could China and Taiwan be heading toward war? Tensions are high. The People's Liberation Army has been carrying out larger and more frequent military drills around Taiwan, making the possibility of invasion feel closer than ever before. Diplomatic red lines are being tested, and the risk of miscalculation is rising. Securing Taiwan is crucial for global stability. The island manufactures over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors, and nearly half of all container ships pass through the Taiwan Strait. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan would upend the global economy, reshape alliances, and likely trigger the most deadly conflict in the Asia-Pacific since World War II. So how close are we to armed conflict in the Taiwan Strait? I'm sitting down with Bonny Lin. She's director of the China Power Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. But first, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on.
Funding for GZERO World is provided by our lead sponsor, Prologis, and by Cox, a family of businesses. Additional funding provided by Jerry and Mary Joy Stead, Carnegie Corporation of New York, and
if you imagine conflict in the Taiwan Strait, it probably looks like something out of Call of Duty. Missiles raining over Taipei, Chinese Marines storming beaches, warships clashing at sea, basically World War III. If you've been paying attention to the news, you can't avoid talk of the conflict. Chinese President Xi Jinping has made reunification with Taiwan a major policy focus and a key pillar of his nationalist agenda.
祖国统一是历史必然，两岸同胞要携手同心，共享民族复兴的伟大荣光。
Xi has ordered the People's Liberation Army to be ready to seize Taiwan by 2027. That's soon. And the PLA has been conducting near daily military drills around the island of late, making policymakers and military analysts pretty nervous. China, at least, is showing that they want to be prepared for an invasion. But is a war with Taiwan in Beijing's interest? It would be deadly, it'd be costly, likely to drag in the United States and its allies. No bueno. Instead, could China take Taiwan without firing a single shot? Think about the geography. Taiwan is an island with few natural resources. They import 97% of its energy, 70% of its food, and they rely on undersea cables for their internet. They've got 5 months of oil, a month of coal, maybe a year of food and reserves. Taiwan also relies heavily on exports like microchips, which make up about 70% of its GDP. Interrupting Taiwan's trade, and it wouldn't just hurt its economy, it would threaten its survival. Even a 50% drop would cripple the island. That's where a quarantine comes in. China could manufacture some minor security incident in the strait and announce new safety inspections for all ships entering and exiting. They could deploy the Coast Guard, technically a civilian law enforcement body, not the military, to inspect cargo and turn away tankers. Nothing overtly military, like customs with Chinese characteristics. This tactic is what is called a gray zone. It's warfare action that stays just below a threshold that would trigger an international response. You can see why it's ideal for Beijing. No missiles, no tanks, just a slow, suffocating squeeze. And China wouldn't have to stop there. Cyber attacks could knock out Taiwan's power grid, banking system. Disinformation would flood the Taiwanese internet and undermine government trust. If Taiwan responds with force, China can claim it was provoked and escalate. Add to all this uncertainty the U.S. response. The Taiwan Relations Act says that Washington will help Taiwan defend itself, and it considers coercion, including blockades, a threat to peace. But would a United States president really risk war with a nuclear-armed China over what Beijing claims are legal maritime safety inspections? For decades, the U.S. has adhered to a policy known as strategic ambiguity, refusing to say whether it would indeed use military force to help defend Taiwan if China invaded. That ambiguity has worked. so far. But it leaves Taipei open to exactly the sort of non-military pressure that Beijing prefers. It's a slow, steady erosion of Taiwanese autonomy, and it leaves the world wondering, how far can China push? How long can Taiwan hold out before a crisis is inevitable? To help make sense of all this, I'm joined by Bonny Lin. She's director of the China Power Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Bonny Lin, welcome to GZERO World.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite, Ian. Really great to be here with you.
A lot to talk about. You've said that the risk of war with Taiwan is getting higher. Explain for our viewers just a little context of what you mean by that.
Sure. So as a baseline, I don't think there's a high risk of war right now in the Taiwan Strait. I think right now it's low or medium. But we are seeing more Chinese military preparations for war. We're seeing more antagonism from Beijing against the current Taiwan president, William Lai. And there's a lot more suspicion that William Lai will do more to push for Taiwan independence. There's been a lot of talk in DC about 2027, about how that's a date for when China will have military capabilities to invade Taiwan. That's definitely still there. That's still on Xi Jinping's mind. There's been no change in terms of Xi instructing his military to have the capabilities. But I think what worries my team also about 2027 is the end of 2027 is also the election for William Lai as he goes into his second term. So China is worried that Lai will be much more provocative in 2027.
Tell me what it feels like to be in Taiwan in this period of great geopolitical instability right now. How much is that reality pervasive in everyday life for just a Taiwanese citizen?
I guess I would say right now, I mean, your everyday Taiwan citizen goes about his or her own life normally, right? There's probably more worry about what's happening on the tariff side than what we, at least in DC, would view as the near daily PLA threat against Taiwan. I don't think most Taiwan folks are worried about that on a day-to-day basis.
President Trump has come out and he said that TSMC, the global semiconductor company, is ripping Americans off. He has said that the Taiwanese don't spend enough money on defense. Is there a broader concern about, is America really there for us?
As with Taipei dealing with any new U.S. administration, it's trying to understand what is the U.S. policy towards Taiwan. There's also a desire to understand who will be driving that Taiwan policy, whether that's at the National Security Council, State Department, or Department of Defense. I think what I would say right now is Taiwan's current president, William Lai, has made it pretty clear in a variety of speeches as well as policy announcements that Taiwan recognizes that on the defense side needs to do more on its defense. He set a floor of 3% of GDP spending for defense. He also recognizes that economic issues very central to President Trump. So he has called for he's established most recently a sovereign wealth fund for Taiwan businesses to be able to invest more abroad, including investing in the United States. And he's also noted that Taiwan as a democracy will work with the United States and other democracies to try to construct a non-red supply chain.
When we see the Chinese government engaging in more military exercises, live fire exercises, all the way around Taiwan, in Taiwanese airspace, Taiwanese waters, all of these things.
Right.
What's the reaction of the government to that? What's the reaction of the president and of the opposition?
So in terms of Chinese exercises around Taiwan, so there's these large-scale exercises that China has been increasing the rate of. So since President Lai has been in power, so since January 2024, we've seen 3 large named Chinese exercises and a lot more smaller, not named and not announced Chinese military exercises. In terms of daily operations, we see Chinese aircraft and military vessels coming into Taiwan's self-identified air defense zone on a daily basis. And about once every 2 weeks or so, we see an elevated intrusion of both China's aircraft coordinated with China's vessels. So lots and lots of activity. And I would recite Admiral Paparo.
Compared to like a year ago, dramatically more.
dramatically more. So in 2021, when China engaged in its large-scale summer exercises opposite Taiwan, involved 1 brigade of Chinese forces. 2022, it was 6 brigades. 2024, it became 42 brigades, of which over 100 Chinese naval vessels and 2/3 of China's amphibious fleet. So the scale went from 1 to 42 between 2021 to 2024.
2/3 of China's amphibious fleet
Yes.
involved in a single set of exercises around Taiwan.
Yes. And I think sometimes those figures are lost because we constantly hear about these Chinese military activities, but the rate and pace of Chinese activities around Taiwan has been increasing quite a bit.
As has their military spend.
Yes, yes. And I would also note that this year there has been some alarming military developments that we've seen. So we saw China showcase 2 mobile bridges that would basically allow China not only to leverage the People's Liberation Army Navy, but also, as you know, China leads in shipbuilding. So they have lots of large container ships, lots of cargo ships, lots of roll-on, roll-off ferries. So these 2 mobile bridges will allow China to use its commercial ships and to bring heavy assets onto Taiwan. We also saw this year.
So it's preparing for a potential amphibious assault. They want everyone to know they can do that.
That's right. China is also constructing a very massive, large underground facility near Beijing. And this was recently revealed in some of the news articles this year, too. So lots and lots of developments that are showcasing that China is very dead serious about using military force if they need to.
Hong Kong, of course, had an autonomous political system. They don't anymore.
Right.
What makes Taiwan different, if anything?
Within Taiwan, I think a major difference is that Hong Kong never had its own separate military. Taiwan has its own separate military. And also the difference is Hong Kong is connected to mainland China by land. Whereas within Taiwan, these Taiwan Strait creates a separation to the extent that regardless of how capable you assess the Chinese military, most would say that a Chinese amphibious invasion of Taiwan will be the most complex military operation we've ever seen in history, more complex than the Normandy invasion, right? So there's a sense within Taiwan that yes, China's military capabilities are increasing, China's economic power is increasing. There's a whole range of levers that Beijing could use against Taiwan. But they have the advantage of the defense. And if Taiwan can invest enough to build up its capabilities and have U.S. allies and partners come to Taiwan's defense, Taiwan should be able to either deter China from engaging those operations to begin with, or make such an operation sufficiently complex and uncertain that even China can't be confident that it can be successful in amphibious invasion.
The Chinese government has long said that the integration of Taiwan into the PRC is not only a priority, but an inevitability.
That's right.
I understand that the Taiwanese government doesn't accept that, but is there a growing fear, even a growing realization that even if you don't accept it, that's the future that is in store?
I don't think folks within Taiwan believe it's inevitable. Even within Washington, D.C., I don't think we believe it's inevitable, mainly because how complex the operation is. I think we also forget that if China were to invade Taiwan, there will be tremendous economic consequences that China would have to bear. What I often hear from the people in Taipei is the people who make up the Chinese People's Liberation Army, many of them are men, that many of them are only children, right? So it would be a significant loss to China if it were to engage in such an operation because of how deadly it would be on its population. And China has been looking quite a bit at what are its lessons learned from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And if China were to invade Taiwan, Beijing is expecting massive sanctions to the extent maybe even more than what we levied against Russia. And so the entire operation is not just a military calculation, but will have significant economic and financial consequences too.
Short of invasion, what do you believe the Chinese are trying to accomplish?
So I think the ultimate Chinese goal is first to prevent independence, and then when possible, and definitely before 2049, basically the centennial anniversary of the
CCP.
of the founding of China, to have unification. But there's actually quite a bit of debate in China what actually is unification and what are the conditions that could be offered to Taiwan as part of unification. I think now, given all Beijing saw with the opposition within Hong Kong, the protests, there's probably less of a desire to allow Taiwan to have its own military. But there should be some recognition, at least among Taipei, that Taiwan is part of China. So I think if China were to really move forward on unification, we would actually, if they short of an invasion, right, we could see a variety of formulations in which you could see a leadership in Beijing saying, well, that isn't exactly the way we control Hong Kong or some of the other special zones or provinces within Beijing, but that could satisfy our criteria for unification. But below an invasion threshold, China has other options for unification with Taiwan. A blockade is a very possible operation.
Inspect ships, for example, coming in.
So there's also the option of China using its Coast Guard, which is generally viewed by the outside world as a law enforcement asset, but is really an extension of the People's Liberation Army. As you know, a blockade is viewed as an act of war, whereas a custom inspection is not viewed as an act of war. There are lots of different ways that China could force Taiwan or put more pressure on Taiwan short of an invasion.
Do you see a potential future Taiwanese government under domestic political pressure that would say, okay, we're willing to talk about what reunification might mean short of we give up all of our rights? Do you think that's possible?
Not until Taiwan's been under duress for quite some time. The public opinion polls in Taiwan show more and more Taiwan population either satisfied with the status quo or against unification. And that's been a trend that we've seen for decades. I think where Beijing falls short is Beijing's efforts to reach out towards the Taiwan public, Beijing's efforts to win the hearts and minds of the Taiwan public, that they are falling way short on that. So yes, they have the capabilities, but they're not getting any of the love from the Taiwan people. In fact, they're pushing the Taiwan people away from them more and more.
Now, the U.S. relationship with China famously is absent trust right now, and that's not a new development, but it gets better and worse. Is a better relationship between the U.S. and China good or bad for Taiwan, and why?
I think when the United States has a really good relationship with China, there are probably concerns in Taipei that Washington may not be willing to support Taiwan as much because of the really good relationship with China. There's also a sense that if China has a really good relationship with Washington, that maybe China is less worried about Washington supporting Taiwan, so maybe China doesn't need to put as much pressure on Taiwan. So it really comes down to what exactly, like where these two balances are.
Because there are these two tendencies in the Trump administration, right? On the one hand, you say, okay, we don't trust China, we need to spend more on the military, we really want to contain these guys, they're the threat to us. On the other hand, you have this tendency of, we don't want wars, not our problem. Europe, you take care of Ukraine. Taiwan, you take care of yourself. Which of those two is more present in Taiwanese thinking about Washington right now? Which do you worry about more? Which do you think is more important?
So I think Taipei definitely hopes the first category is more dominant.
But do you believe that?
At the end of the day, when it comes to the defense of Taiwan, the responsibility and the decision will be made by President Trump. And it seems pretty clear to me that President Trump does not like wars, has prided himself in stopping wars and avoiding wars. But at the same time, even during the first Trump administration, we saw that President Trump was always friendly with authoritarian governments while his team was very hawkish against them. So in some ways, he plays the good cop when it comes to dealing with these authoritarian governments. And I think that's something that Taipei does recognize, that at the end of the day, despite what President Trump might be saying about China, might be saying about Xi Jinping as his friend, the United States is set on competition with China.
Now, do they really like it when a whole bunch of senior leaders come over, engage with them, or would they rather stay off the headlines because they know that antagonizes mainland China?
So under President Tsai Ing-wen, there was somewhat of a balance between them, in the sense that there was a recognition that when then Speaker Pelosi went to Taiwan in 2022,
Cause trouble.
yeah, it caused China to engage in this massive exercise. And then afterwards, almost every year, we've seen a massive Chinese military exercise around
So
Taiwan.
arguably, you would have been better off in Taiwan if she had never gone.
I'm not trying to say that, because her setting foot on Taiwan showcased U.S. support for Taiwan. But I think what the sentiment has been since 2022 is, to be honest, within Taipei, this is my understanding, particularly among the DPP, is that regardless of what Taipei does and what the United States does, China will always find excuses to escalate more against Taiwan. So even if you have a congressional delegation, or if you don't have them, I think there's more of an assessment in Taipei as well as in DC, particularly under the Trump administration too, that China will just keep on finding these excuses to escalate.
Bonny Lin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ian.
That's our show this week. Come back next week. And if you like what you've seen, or even if you don't, but you're planning your own show of force in the Taiwan Strait, why don't you take a minute to sign up for our own newsletter? It can help you. It's called GZERO Daily.
Funding for GZERO World is provided by our lead sponsor, Prologis, and by Cox, a family of businesses. Additional funding provided by Jerry and Mary Joy Stead, Carnegie Corporation of New York, and